Office workers were truly something else. Kwon yawned deeply, still feeling exhausted as he dragged himself toward the office. Even after 2 months, he still hadn't adjusted to this early morning routine. As he walked, he suddenly heard people muttering nearby. One man covered his mouth and frowned, saying, "What's with these kids this early in the morning?" Curious, Kwon shifted his gaze toward the source of the commotion. 3 young boys were blocking the stairs near the station entrance, smoking cigarettes and chatting loudly. One of them, holding a cigarette in his hand, turned to the fat boy beside him and laughed. "Look at this bastard's coin account." The fat boy, sitting on the stairs while still smoking, replied bitterly, "Why are you laughing, damn it? I'm down 40%. I'm screwed." The third boy smirked and added, "Not even Warren Buffett's grandpa could save this portfolio." The fat boy angrily shouted back, "Don't laugh, you crazy bastard. You don't lose money if you don't sell." The black-haired boy continued laughing and said, "Even if you sell now, you'd only make as much as an office worker's monthly salary." The fat boy snapped, "Monthly salary? What country are you from, you idiot?" They kept smoking and bickering among themselves while passers-by muttered complaints. "What a nuisance, blocking the middle of the station entrance," one person thought. Another sighed, "Man, if only I were 5 years younger." A third shook his head and thought, "Crypto has ruined all these kids." Kwon observed the entire scene quietly. He blinked slowly and thought to himself, "They say even the landscape changes in 10 years, but clowns like these never change. Forget it. The police will handle them." Just then, a hesitant voice interrupted the boys. "Excuse me, young men." The 3 boys turned toward the voice, cigarettes still in hand. An old man in a security guard uniform stood there, smiling nervously. He pointed in another direction and said politely, "Do you mind smoking a bit further over there?" The boys burst into laughter. "He's basically telling us to get lost," one of them said. The black-haired boy chuckled, "That's hilarious." The fat boy, however, lowered his head for a moment before glaring at the old man with pure anger. He stepped forward aggressively, grabbed the old man's shirt, and shouted, "Hey, you damn old boomer. Acting all high and mighty when you're just some pathetic security guard?" The security guard looked shocked and frightened. He replied nervously, "No, I just," before he could finish. The fat boy yelled again, "Are you gonna relieve my stress for me? Or are you gonna fix my losses with that pathetic little salary of yours?" The old man struggled to speak, "No, that's not what I meant." Meanwhile, the other 2 boys had already taken out their phones and started recording the scene, laughing. "This is hilarious," one said. "Upload it on YouTube," the black-haired boy added. The fat boy continued gripping the old man's shirt tightly and shouted, "Old man, did you just hit me? You must be loaded, huh?" The old man pleaded, clearly shaken, "I never hit you. That's enough. Let's stop this. Let's just talk it out." The boys laughed even harder at his reaction. His reaction is priceless. Suddenly, Kwon stepped directly in front of the phone camera and said calmly, "Looks like you're filming something fun." The 2 boys jumped in fright. "Whoa, shit. You scared me. What the hell is this guy?" the black-haired boy exclaimed. Kwon narrowed his eyes and stared at them with a serious expression. The 2 boys immediately bowed their heads and blurted out, "We're sorry for causing trouble." Hearing this, the fat boy turned around while still holding the old man's shirt. When he saw his friends bowing, he laughed mockingly and said, "Hey, did you idiots get shot in the head? Why are you bowing to some lowly wage slave? You morons!" Hearing the fat boy's words, Kwon felt a surge of anger. Before he could react, one of the boys quickly signaled with his finger, urging the fat boy to keep quiet. In his mind, he thought, "You clueless idiot." The black-haired boy also thought desperately, "Shut it, you punk." Kwon stepped forward, his voice cold and his expression dark. A frightening aura radiated from him as he spoke, "Wage slave?" He paused, then continued in a low, menacing tone, "Before tax, 26 million won a year. After various taxes and deductions, I take home 1.96 million won a month." The fat boy released the old security guard's shirt, turned to face Kwon, and burst out laughing. "Bragging about that pocket change?" Kwon took another step forward, his eyes sharp. "To earn that money, there are people who start moving before dawn and work hard just to get by." The fat boy kept laughing. "I make 2 million in a week." Suddenly, Kwon grabbed the fat boy's face with his powerful hand, squeezing it tightly. The fat boy tried to scream, but the grip was too strong. Kwon pressed harder, his voice filled with rage. "Even if it's the same 2 million won. Money earned by a maggot like you." With a violent motion, he smashed the fat boy's face into the ground and roared, "Is not worth the same." Kwon finally released his hand. The fat boy lay there, barely conscious, with blood trickling down his face. One of the fat boy's friends stood frozen in shock, his mouth wide open. "There's no way. I'm not mistaken," he thought. His clothes and hair are completely different from back then. But that movement. It's definitely him. Meanwhile, Kwon sat down beside the unconscious fat boy and said angrily, "Don't get me wrong. I didn't hit you because you belittled my salary. I hit you because you ignored the value of my labor." The fat boy, barely able to speak, stammered nervously. "I am sorry." 10 years ago, at the age of 18, Kwon had conquered the entire underworld and stood at the peak of violence. He was known simply as the legend. Back in the present, Kwon looked at his blood-stained hand and shouted in frustration, "There's blood on me. I just washed this yesterday. How am I supposed to show up at the office like this?" The other boy was still lost in his thoughts. People called him simply the legend. So why is he working as an office employee? He gritted his teeth in frustration. I thought he'd be some kind of gang boss by now. Kwon suddenly turned to the boy who was staring at him. Feeling a wave of fear, the boy saw Kwon smirk as he looked at him and said, Your shirt looks pretty clean." The boy started shaking. The next moment, the scene had completely shifted. Kwon was now wearing the boy's clean shirt, while the shirtless boy was giving him a ride on his bike. As they headed toward the office, the shirtless boy asked hesitantly, "Sir, may I ask you one thing?" Kwon, sitting behind him on the bike, replied, "What is it?" The boy glanced back at him and asked, "You were once called a legend. Why are you working as a wage slave?" "I mean, as some office worker?" Kwon thought for a moment, then replied calmly, "Legend and all that. It's just a meaningless past from my snot-nosed days. Once you get older, you realize that the ones who show up at the same place at the same time every day, quietly and honestly doing their job, those are the people who are truly strong." Kwon smiled, but his eyes still looked tired as he continued, "So don't end up regretting it later like I did. Start living a life with real value from now on." The shirtless boy replied nervously, "I'm actually satisfied with my salary right now, though." Hearing that, Kwon said, "Hey kid, I'm telling you, money isn't everything. How much do you make a month, anyway?" The shirtless boy answered, "It's not that much, but around 6 million won a month." Kwon's eyes widened in shock. "What? You make my 3 months' pay in 1 month?" He quickly regained his composure and said calmly, "I'll make good use of this shirt." The boy exclaimed, "Ah, that's a limited edition Gucci shirt." Kwon ignored him and said, "We're gonna be late. Let's go." "Yes, sir," the boy replied and immediately increased the speed of the bike. Scene shift. Samjin Group was a massive conglomerate that ranked 30th among Korea's largest business groups. It operated in major sectors such as construction, heavy industry, and leisure. However, like every Korean chaebol, behind the glamorous flagship companies, there was always a subsidiary that handled all the dirty and difficult work. At the very bottom of that chain, carrying the name Samjin on its back, was a company that would sell even dog crap if it turned a profit. This was Samjin Trading Company. In the office, the manager suddenly shouted at Kwon, "Employee Kwon, are you playing house with me or something?" Kwon replied nervously, "Manager, that's not what I..." The manager cut him off sharply, "Then what exactly are you doing right now?" The other employees outside the manager's office watched the scene quietly but chose to ignore it. The manager waved the documents angrily and continued, "I told you to list some unique places to buy used motorbikes. What is this? Dongyeon Market? Banj Market? Do you think the company is here to raise your manner temperature for you?" He let out a frustrated sigh and added, "Kwon, I'm not asking for anything difficult, am I? I don't have the bandwidth to micromanage every little task right now. Just do it properly, okay?" Kwon lowered his head sadly and said, "I'm sorry." Hearing the apology, the manager grew even more irritated. "Don't just be good at saying sorry. Be good at your job. Your job." Exhausted, the manager rubbed his forehead with his hand, waved dismissively, and sighed. "Might as well talk to a rock." Okay. Just get back to work." Kwon returned to his seat, feeling unhappy. He kept repeating the words in his head, "A rock. I'm a rock." Beside him, Ms. Minji, who was focused on her work, spoke softly, "He's just touchy today. Don't let it get to you too much." Kwon looked even sadder, his eyes filled with dejection. "Ms. Minji," she continued, "if you get stressed out by every little comment, you won't last long in a company." Kwon glanced at her and muttered, "Says the person who always speaks her mind." Minji shrugged and replied, "That's the weight of being a manager, I guess." He got chewed out badly this morning by Mujin shipping over the overseas freight issue. On the other side of the office, Manager Kim was still holding his head, clearly stressed. Suddenly, loud footsteps echoed through the office, followed by an angry voice shouting, "Where's Manager Kim?" It was Director Choi Seo-kin from Mujin Shipping. Hearing the voice, Manager Kim shot up from his seat nervously and said, "Oh, Director Choi." "Sir, what brings you here?" Director Choi shouted furiously, "What brings me here, my ass? I'm here to renegotiate the freight charges, Manager Kim. Manager Kim tried to calm him down. Let's sit down and talk this over first. Enough. Director Choi snapped. Bring me the contract. Meanwhile, Kwon stood up slightly from his seat and asked curiously, Who is that guy? Ms. Minji replied in a low voice, That's Director Choi Seo-kin from Mujin Shipping. Ever since President Choi collapsed, he's been running everything over there. Director Choi continued shouting at Manager Kim, his voice growing louder. The news keeps saying that international freight rates will keep rising. We can't just sit on our hands and be the only ones taking losses, can we? Ms. Minji leaned toward Kwon and whispered, You have no idea how badly he throws his weight around. The manager is taking all the hits on our behalf. Manager Kim nervously adjusted his glasses and replied carefully, Like I've told you before, Director Choi. Raising the freight rates any further is very difficult. You know very well we've already adjusted them 3 times this year alone. Minji continued whispering to Kwon, I heard he recently started learning MMA. And now he even hits people. At that exact moment, Director Choi suddenly kicked Manager Kim's foot hard. Manager Kim yelped in pain and quickly pulled his foot up, rubbing it. Director Choi shouted angrily, We're the ones losing money because export volumes are stuck. How can you be so relaxed? If you don't adjust the freight rates right now, we won't send a single ship out. Still holding his sore foot, Manager Kim said weakly, I'm sorry, Director Choi. Director Choi snapped, If we don't get a clear answer by the end of this week, we're moving to another shipping company. That's that. Watching the scene, Minji sighed sadly and said to Kwon, I don't know what his problem is. Kwon, just pretend you didn't see anything. That's what's best for both the manager and all of us. Instead of standing around here, it would help the manager more if you went out and found another company. When she shifted her eyes toward Kwon, she was surprised to find his seat empty. She muttered in confusion, Huh? Kwon? What the? Where did he go? I'm talking here, you. On the other side, Director Choi snatched some documents from the nearby table and waved them aggressively. If you don't want us to cut ties, he shouted, you'd better start behaving properly from now on. He raised the documents high, preparing to slap them across Manager Kim's face. Manager Kim closed his eyes in fear, bracing for the impact. But suddenly, a strong hand grabbed Director Choi's wrist, stopping the documents mid-air. It was Kwon. Director Choi turned his head with a mocking laugh. And who the hell are you supposed to be? Kwon replied with a serious expression, These are important documents. They shouldn't get mixed up or damaged like this. Manager Kim looked shocked and stammered. Hey, Kwon. Director Choi smirked and said, You're funny, you know that? Do you even know who I am before running your mouth like this? Kwon answered calmly, Mujin Shipping, right? Director Choi let out a loud laugh. Mujin Shipping? Wow, this kid is interesting. He then flicked Kwon's forehead with his finger and sneered, Listen up. A lowly employee like you isn't even someone I need to talk to. Got it? Kwon struggled to control his rising anger. Director Choi continued smirking and added, Doesn't this company teach you the basics? When you meet someone for the first time. Suddenly, Director Choi kicked Kwon in the shin and shouted, You bow first. Bow. You don't even know how to show proper respect, you little punk. The sharp pain made Kwon scream as he bent down, clutching his leg. Director Choi continued mockingly, First time seeing someone like this, huh? Then he shouted again, What are you staring at, you idiot? Kwon's face twisted with rage. He stood up, gritting his teeth, ready to teach the man a lesson. But before he could move, Manager Kim quickly placed a hand on Kwon's shoulder and nervously said to Director Choi, We'll review the freight issue again and get back to you as soon as possible. Kwon glanced at the manager, confused as to why he wasn't being allowed to act. Manager Kim continued politely, Please have a safe trip back, Director Choi. He then bowed his head deeply. Kwon kept staring at Director Choi until the man finally left. Later, Manager Kim took Kwon up to the office rooftop. He pulled out a cigarette and asked, Kwon, do you smoke? I quit 10 years ago, Kwon replied. Manager Kim raised an eyebrow. Aren't you 28? He lit his cigarette, took a drag, and asked, Do you know why the company hired you? Kwon looked nervous for a moment, then rubbed the back of his head shyly. Well, my specs? Manager Kim chuckled. Very funny. The only specs you have are a GED and a motorcycle license, right? He took another puff of his cigarette, turned to Kwon, and said seriously, It was your eyes. I saw something real in them back then. I could tell you actually wanted to accomplish something here. Manager Kim paused before continuing, But Kwon, there's one thing you must remember if you want to survive in corporate life. This society is full of people you can't reason with. Even when it's unfair and unreasonable, sometimes an office worker's fate is to swallow their pride and bow their head, because in the end, that's what protects the company. He threw the cigarette butt into the trash bin and placed a hand on Kwon's shoulder. So if you ever see something like that again, next time, just pretend you didn't see it. And if you did see it, forget it. As Manager Kim turned to leave, Kwon spoke sadly, Manager. Before he could finish, Manager Kim said honestly, putting the company and our positions aside. As a man, it's humiliating, you know? He laughed bitterly and added, getting your leg kicked by some punk at this age. Kwon could clearly see the pain and humiliation behind the manager's smile, and it made him feel sad. Manager Kim stepped forward and said, oh. And since we're on the topic, I didn't fail to dodge it. I let it hit me on purpose, alright? Kwon followed behind him and laughed, yes, of course. Manager Kim chuckled. I used to be pretty tough back in the day, you know? By now, night had fallen. A full moon hung in the sky, partially covered by clouds. Kwon's phone rang. It was the shirtless boy. Yes, sir. I can tell by how often you go to the gym, boss, the boy said. Kwon stood in front of a black MMA gym and replied into the phone, that's enough. Go shower and get some sleep. Yes, sir. Call me anytime you need me. Loyalty. The boy replied enthusiastically before ending the call. Kwon smirked and thought to himself. Manager. Do you know who a crazy, unreasonable guy like Director Choi fears the most? Someone even more unreasonable than he is. At the gym, Director Choi was sparring one-on-one with an opponent. He kept relentlessly throwing punches as the opponent desperately blocked with his hands and shouted in fear, please. Stop. Director Choi smirked and continued punching, aiming for the man's face. Didn't I tell you to guard properly? Hands up. If you take their money, you'd better give them their money's worth. One powerful punch landed directly on the opponent's face. Blood sprayed from his mouth as he staggered backward and collapsed unconscious on the floor. Director Choi stood over him, breathing heavily, and stared down at the motionless man. His subordinates rushed over immediately. One of them shouted, Hey, are you okay? Stay with me. The other yelled, Go get some water and the first aid kit. Director Choi looked at the unconscious man and smirked. Come on, I barely hit you a few times. What a crybaby. The coach approached from behind, waving his finger angrily. Director Choi, are you going to keep this up? If you keep injuring my guys every time you come here, I can't just let it slide. I know you're a sponsor, but this is way over the line. Director Choi removed his gloves and smiled coldly. Director. His expression suddenly twisted with anger as he said in a menacing tone, Looks like you've got some energy to raise your voice at me now. Life must be treating you well. Huh. It doesn't feel that long ago that you were begging me to help keep this place afloat. The coach trembled and replied nervously, I mean, what I'm saying is. Suddenly, Director Choi laughed and pulled out a thick wad of cash. Go have a nice dinner with the boys. If you want to get along, you've got to eat well. Take it already, my arm's getting tired. The coach looked at the money with a conflicted expression, but remained silent. Director Choi continued mockingly, Or are you saying you want more? Wow, Director. You've become quite the professional hustler. It's all about money now, huh? If you don't take it in 5 seconds, should I just put it back? At that moment, Kwon arrived and said calmly, Get a hold of yourself. I'm here to sign up for a 1-month membership. The coach quickly replied, Yes, of course. On the other side, Director Choi smirked and said with a smile, Huh? You're Kim's little lackey, right? Kwon loosened his tie and coldly asked, Can we start sparring right away? He stepped into the fighting ring and put on a pair of gloves. Director Choi also put his gloves back on and said arrogantly, This is the problem with people these days. Everyone thinks they've got it the hardest. He inserted his mouthguard and continued while adjusting it, compared to the stress that people like me, society's leaders, have to endure, your lives are nothing. So when some clueless punk tries to climb up on me, it really pisses me off. He smirked and added, Especially some kid with no money, no connections, and only a scrap of pride to cling to. Meanwhile, Kwon completely ignored him and calmly stretched his arms, preparing for the fight. Director Choi stretched his arms and smiled as he tried to climb into the ring in front of me. Must have burned you up, huh? Coming all the way here, he said. Or did you come for Manager Kim's revenge? Kwon smacked his gloves together while putting them on and replied with a bored expression. Man, you sure talk a lot. You don't have any friends, do you? Director Choi's face twisted with anger. He raised his fist toward Kwon and shouted. This bastard's got such a big mouth. This time, you're not getting off with just a little kick. As Director Choi swung his fist, Kwon easily leaned his head backward and dodged it. In a calm voice, he said, You pay money to beat people up, so you think that power actually belongs to you. Huh. Enraged, Director Choi immediately swung his fist again and roared. I'll kill you. Kwon bent down and dodged a punch once more. You're ignoring everything I say. I guess I was right about you. You really don't have any friends. Kwon quickly lowered his stance and prepared to counter. As his punch flew toward Director Choi, the director noticed it coming and smirked. You sure about this? Director Choi taunted. If you throw that punch, you won't be able to keep working at the company, you know? But Kwon didn't care. With pure anger in his eyes, he launched a powerful punch straight to Director Choi's chin. The impact was so strong that the director's mouthguard slipped out of place. Director Choi looked shocked. He couldn't believe Kwon had actually hit him. Kwon smirked, holding his punching stance, and said, Yeah. If I were afraid of that then. He raised his fist again, preparing to throw another punch, and continued. I wouldn't have come here in the first place.